This saint is known for introducing the Chaplet of Divine Mercy in the image of Jesus as the Divine Mercy. But did you know that she also suffered very much from the treatment of others, as well as her own natural weaknesses, such as doubt, humiliation, and worry about what others thought about her? This saint was looked down upon as a fanatic, attention-seeking, and weak woman who couldn't pull her own weight around the convent and couldn't even strain a pot of potatoes without dropping them all over the floor. This saint is Saint Faustina Kowalska. Saint Faustina was born and baptized Helena to a poor Polish family. She was the third of 10 children. As a child, Helena was naturally very pious. Prayerful even as a little girl, she would often wake up in the middle of the night to pray, saying that her guardian angel woke her. When she was 5, she dreamed that the Mother of God led her by the hand through a beautiful garden. She was obedient to her parents, good to her siblings, and hardworking with her chores. Out of all the children, it was Helena that her parents trusted the most. In fact, she was the only one who knew where the shotgun was and how to use it. Not even her brothers knew where it was kept. When Helena was 12 years old, she was sent to school for the first time. Although she knew how to read, she was placed in the 2nd grade. After a few years, she was forced to leave to make room for new students. When she was 15, she worked as a maid for a woman who lived in Alexandrov. After working for her for a year, she felt that she must respond to the call to enter the convent. But her parents said no, mainly because they didn't have the money for the dowry or the necessary wardrobe. Helena tried to forget her call by focusing on more worldly things like parties and dresses and her appearance. One day, when she was at a dance with her sister Josephine, Helena saw Jesus standing in front of her, suffering from his wounds of his passion. What he said to her pierced her through the heart. "How long shall I put up with you, and how long will you keep putting me off?" Quite shaken, she left the dance and went to a church to pray. Kneeling in front of the tabernacle, she asked Jesus what she should do. She heard the words, "Go at once to Warsaw. You will enter a convent there." Immediately, she packed her bags, said goodbye to her family, and left for Warsaw the next morning. When she arrived, she went to a morning mass where she heard her next directions from Jesus. "Go to that priest and tell him everything. He will tell you what to do next." The priest was very surprised by Helena's story, but did not dismiss her. He sent her to a well-known pious woman, where Helena stayed and worked as a maid, while going from convent to convent, seeking where Jesus wanted her. She was rejected repeatedly until she finally reached the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy. This community helped women and girls who had fallen into prostitution or living on the streets. They helped the girls find a better life with religious education and teaching them skills to run their own homes. Here, Helena told the Mother Superior, Mother Michael, all that she went through. Mother Michael, too, was going to send her away, but instead she said, "Go to the master of the house and ask if he will accept you." So Helena went to the tabernacle and asked Jesus in a simple way if he accepted her. She heard a voice say, "I do accept you. You are in my heart." She came back to Mother Michael and repeated what Jesus had told her. Mother Michael said to Helena, "If the master of the house accepts you, then I too must accept you." And this is how Helena became part of the congregation of the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy. However, after only 3 weeks of being in this convent, Helena felt a strong temptation to leave. She felt that there wasn't enough time for prayer, as much of the time was spent working. She was going to tell the Mother Superior about her decision when suddenly she saw the suffering face of Jesus. She asked him who had done this to him, and he replied, "It is you who will cause me this pain if you leave this convent. It is this place that I called you and nowhere else, and I have prepared many graces for you." And so, Helena's doubts were put to rest, and she stayed. Helena's main duty was kitchen duties, and it was here that she had much trouble as she was physically unable to keep up with many of the taxing jobs that required a lot of strength. One of the jobs she struggled with was draining the potatoes. She writes of this in her diary. One time during the novitiate, when Mother Directress sent me to work in the Lord's kitchen, I was very upset because I could not manage the pots, which were very large. The most difficult task for me was draining the potatoes, and sometimes I split half of them with the water. When I told this to Mother Directress, she said that with time I would get used to it and gain the necessary skill. Yet the task was not getting any easier as I was growing weaker every day. So I would move away when it was time to drain the potatoes. The sisters noticed that I avoided this task and were very much surprised. They did not know that I could not help in spite of my willingness to do this and not spare myself. At noon, during the examination of conscience, I complained to God about my weakness. Then I heard the following words of my soul: "From today on you will do this easily. I shall strengthen you." That evening, when the time came to drain off the water from the potatoes, I hurried to be the first to do it, trusting in the Lord's words. I took up the pot with ease and poured off the water perfectly. But when I took off the cover to let the potatoes steam off, I saw there in the pot, in the place of the potatoes, whole bunches of red roses, beautiful beyond description. I had never seen such roses before. Greatly astonished and unable to understand the meaning of this, I heard a voice within me saying, "I change such hard work of yours into bouquets of most beautiful flowers, and their perfume rises up to my throne." From then on, I have tried to drain the potatoes myself, not only during my week when it was my turn to cook, but also in replacement of other sisters when it was their turn. And not only do I do this, but I try to be the first to help in any other burdensome task, because I've experienced how much this pleases God. After her time in the novitiate was completed, Helena took her vows and took the name Faustina. Sister Faustina may have been favored with beautiful visions and inner locutions, but Jesus balanced these favors with suffering, so that Sister Faustina would grow in holiness. She writes in her journal, "Often my best of intentions are misinterpreted by the sisters, a type of suffering which is most painful, but God allows it, and we must accept it so that we can become more like Jesus. There was one thing I could not understand for a long time. Jesus ordered me to tell everything to my superiors, but my superiors did not believe what I said and treated me with pity as though I were being deluded or imagining things." Jesus often worked on Sister Faustina's soul by allowing people to misunderstand her. Other times, he allowed her to work on self-mortification by suffering humiliations. For example, when she went to confession one day, the priest gave her a penance of laughing out loud 10 times a day. Another time, he gave her a penance of running around the garden as fast as she could. It was with blind faith that Faustina took these penances, although they did surprise her. She said, "Evidently, God wants me to give him glory through suffering." Another time, Sister Faustina failed in a duty in the kitchen and was ordered to sit on the counter for some time as penance and self-mortification. So she sat there, and another sister, who knew nothing about the situation, saw Sister Faustina sitting on the counter and scolded her for just sitting there while everyone else did the work. More sisters came in and talked openly about how lazy Sister Faustina was. She wrote in her diary, "Still, I could not get down because Sister had ordered me to sit there by virtue of obedience. Only God knows how many acts of self-denial it took. I thought I would die of shame." Later, Jesus appeared to her during benediction in great beauty and said to her, "My daughter, do not be afraid of sufferings. I am with you." Probably Sister Faustina's greatest cross, however, was to have the image of Jesus painted, which we know today as the Divine Mercy image. She wrote in her diary, "In the evening when I was in my cell, I saw the Lord Jesus clothed in a white garment. One hand was raised in a gesture of blessing, the other touching near the breast. There were 2 large rays, one red, the other pale. Jesus said to me, 'Paint an image according to the pattern you see, with the signature, Jesus, I trust in you.' I desire that this image be venerated, first in your chapel and then throughout the world. I also promise victory over its enemies already here on earth, especially at the hour of death. I myself will defend it as my own glory." But when Sister Faustina tried to tell this to her confessor, he only said to her, "That refers to your soul." She was also told by another priest, "By all means, sister, paint this image of Jesus in your soul." Jesus reiterated his desire by telling her not in the soul, but by a paintbrush, and that there should be a feast of mercy, the Sunday after Easter. Again, she was met with obstacles of resistance, unbelief, and misunderstandings. One priest told her, "There is already a feast of mercy." When Sister Faustina repeated this to Jesus, he said, "And who knows anything about this feast? No one. Even those who should be proclaiming my mercy and teaching people about it often do not know about it themselves. That is why I want the image to be solemnly blessed on the first Sunday after Easter." This mission cost her much peace of mind, as many confessors and superiors were constantly telling her that she was being deluded. During this time, no one knew about the supernatural events that were happening in Sister Faustina's life, nor about the extraordinary mission that was given to her to bear. Only her superiors and confessor knew. One superior was kind and helpful, and another was distrustful and critical. She caused Faustina much misery, saying that Jesus would never appear to someone like her. Faustina wrote in the diary about the incident, saying, "One day, one of the mothers poured out so much of her anger and humiliated me so much that I thought I would be unable to endure it. She said to me, 'You queer, hysterical visionary, get out of this room. Go on with you, sister.' She continued to pour out upon my head everything she could think of. When I got to my cell, I fell on my face before the cross, and then I looked at Jesus. I could not say a word. Suddenly, I heard a voice within my soul. 'Do not fear, I am with you.'" Jesus also introduced to her the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, which he wanted her to introduce to the world. Jesus told her, "At the hour of their death, I defend as my own glory every soul that will say this chaplet, or when others say it for a dying person, the indulgence is the same. When this chaplet is being said by the bedside of a dying person, God's anger is placated, and unfathomable mercy envelopes the soul." Later, when she had to enter the sanatorium for her own declining health, she would pray the Chaplet of Divine Mercy for those who were dying. Jesus revealed to Sister Faustina that she would die in 2 years from the tuberculosis that she had struggled with for some time now. She was not afraid to hear this. On the contrary, she was delighted. She understood that during those next 2 years, her spiritual perfection would be completed, which meant that she had much to suffer. And for the next 2 years, she was in and out of the sanatorium. When she wasn't in the sanatorium, she was able to be back in the convent. When she felt well enough, she worked in the garden. Unlike the kitchen, Sister Faustina was very good at the garden work. In fact, one day, some visitors who were touring the convent and gardens remarked that the convent must have hired a professional. Although she enjoyed working in the garden, it was very hard for her. And one day, as she was working, she was very hot from the sun and said to Jesus, "Jesus, cover the sun, for I cannot stand this heat any longer." Immediately, a cloud covered the sun. In addition to Faustina's sufferings, she also received the holy stigmata, which are the wounds of Christ, although it was invisible. She suffered these wounds on Fridays and occasionally, at other times, when she met someone who was not in the state of grace. Soon it was apparent that Sister Faustina could no longer tend to the garden, so she was assigned to be the gatekeeper of the convent. She soon found out that being the gatekeeper could be a dangerous job. One time, a group of men who insisted that the sisters give them a job were pounding on the door angrily. The Mother Superior sent Faustina to handle them, and at first she was nervous and wasn't sure if she should open the gate or talk to them through the little window. But she heard Jesus say to her, "Go open the gate and talk to them as sweetly as he talked to me." So Faustina very calmly and kindly spoke to them, apologizing that at the moment they had no jobs for them. Appeased by her kindness, the men said it was too bad that there was no work for them, and then left quietly. Other times, the poor would come to the convent for food. The other sister, who had answered the door, would often slam the door in their faces if they tried to come for seconds. But Sister Faustina would pretend that she didn't realize that they had come twice, because she didn't want to embarrass them. Therefore, she always gave more food, even if there wasn't much to give. One time, a poor young man came to the gate asking for food. Sister Faustina gave him some soup and bread, and before she could give it to him, the young man vanished. Sister Faustina realized that it was Jesus whom she was serving, who wanted a taste of her kindness of heart. Jesus instructed Faustina in big things like spreading devotion of the Divine Mercy image, the starting of a new congregation of sisters, and the Divine Mercy Chaplet. But he also taught her in smaller manners, sometimes so trivial that it almost seems strange that Jesus would care about such trifles. One time, Faustina was looking forward to a boat ride that some of the sisters were taking. However, Jesus told her he didn't want her to go, as this would be bad for her soul. Instead of feeling upset and disappointed, and although she didn't totally understand how it would be harmful to her soul, Faustina thanked Jesus for looking out for her well-being, even in the smallest of things that don't always make sense to us. Another time, when Faustina was sent for treatment in Plock, she had the privilege of decorating the chapel with flowers. She decided to pick some of the prettiest flowers for a fellow sister and give it to her. She writes, "As I was approaching the porch of the house, I saw Jesus standing there. In a kind way, he asked me, 'My daughter, to whom are you taking these flowers?' My silence was my reply to the Lord, because I recognized immediately that I had a very subtle attachment to this person, which I had not noticed before. Suddenly, Jesus disappeared. At the same moment, I threw the flowers on the ground and went before the Blessed Sacrament, my heart filled with gratitude for the grace of knowing myself." As Faustina's health continued to deteriorate, so did her body. It was actually decaying, although she didn't understand how it was possible to be alive and her body decay at the same time. Faustina was so puzzled by this that she thought it was some sort of illusion. However, one of the sisters remarked that she could smell a strange smell of decay. She said to Sister Faustina, "Sister, I smell a corpse here, as though it were decaying. Oh, how dreadful it is." The mystery solved, Faustina told her, "Do not be afraid, sister. That smell of a corpse comes from me." Not surprisingly, the sister didn't know what to think of this and left. Sister Faustina then understood that Jesus allowed the sister to smell Sister Faustina's decaying body, so Faustina would have no more doubt, but this caused Faustina much suffering. Faustina's suffering with illness was very difficult because it was often misunderstood. Most of the time she was sick, but not sick enough to be in bed, and so she was expected to work. Because of this, she was often tired and then accused of being lazy. She often had no appetite and felt nauseous, so she was told that she was picky. One time, on New Year's Day, she woke up feeling sick. Every time she tried to get up to go to Mass, she would get sicker and was forced to stay in bed. The sister infirmian saw her still in bed and reprimanded her for not getting up for Mass. Faustina wrote of this in her diary. "I answered her that I couldn't. She shook her head disdainfully and said, 'Such a great feast day, sister, and you don't even go to Mass.' And she left my cell. When I was alone, I tried to get up, but I was seized again with sickness, and so I stayed in bed. Sister Infirmian came back with a thermometer to take my temperature, but I had no fever, even though I felt so ill and unable to rise. So there was another sermon the sister gave me about not giving in to little illnesses. Here in the convent, one isn't taken as seriously ill unless they are in their last agony. My heart was crushed with sorrow, and bitterness flooded my soul, and I repeated these words, 'Welcome, New Year. Welcome, cup of bitterness.' My Jesus, my heart is eager for you, and yet the gravity of my illness prevents me from participating physically in the community prayers, and I am suspected of being lazy." After a month of illness, Faustina eventually recovered enough to join the sisters for prayer and meals, but in addition to her sufferings, God allowed her to experience the dark night of the soul, and she began to have doubts and darkness. With one of her experiences, she wrote that one night she was allowed to experience Jesus' agony in the garden. This was most painful, so painful in fact, that she cried out in pain and asked Jesus to be with her and save her. So great was her temptation to doubt God's existence. Jesus said to her, "My bride, you always please me by your humility. The the greatest misery does not stop me from uniting myself to a soul, but where there is pride, I am not there." Soon Faustina's health began to worsen again. She would have great pain which would cause her to go into a cold sweat and faint. This concerned the other sisters and doctors, who could not find a source for her illness. And so once again, Sister Faustina was sent to the sanatorium. This most recent illness, and seeing all that Sister Faustina had gone through, made the other sisters reflect a little bit more on her holiness, as she dealt with her sufferings with much patience. Believing that she would die soon, they began to ask her for their intentions to be prayed for, and one sister even asked Faustina that she would pray that she would be granted an early death, as she was also suffering from tuberculosis and didn't want to be a burden to the community. Faustina replied that this sister would die a year after her own death, and that is exactly what happened. Still, it was many months before Faustina would die. In the meantime, she continued to pray and suffer, and when she was able, she wrote in her diary about the Divine Mercy as Jesus instructed. In August, Sister Faustina had to be hospitalized, and when Mother Irene heard that Faustina was getting worse, she ran to the hospital to be by her side and insisted that she come back to the convent so they could take care of her. At first, Faustina was reluctant, as she didn't want to be a burden, but she soon relented to Mother Irene's wish. For the month of September, Faustina continued to suffer and pray. She predicted the coming of World War II and said that the churches and convents would be raided. She also knew the date of her death, which she told her confessor, Father Sapaco, privately. On October 5th, Faustina told one of the sisters who was taking care of her that she would die that day, even though at that moment she didn't seem like she was near death. She made her last confession at 4 o'clock, and at 9 o'clock, the sisters gathered around her bedside to pray for her. Soon they went to bed, and only one sister stayed behind. At 10:45 p.m., when it was apparent that Faustina was very close to death, the sister ran to get the others. But when they came back, they found that Faustina had already passed away. She died alone. After Sister Faustina's death, Mother Michael, who knew about the revelations that Faustina experienced, told the rest of the community about how Sister Faustina had been used as a tool to spread the devotion of the Divine Mercy. The sisters were amazed. Word spread as the devotion grew, and many people came to visit Sister Faustina's grave and pray for her intercession. During the war, on 3 separate occasions, the Nazis banged on the convent door to shut the convent down, but each time, the sisters gathered around Sister Faustina's grave to pray for her protection and intercession. Each time, the convent was spared, and the convent remained open during the entire time of the war. In 1959, the devil, who hated the work of the Divine Mercy, caused confusion, which made Rome call the work to a halt. But this was due to inaccurate information. In 1978, the declaration to call the work to a halt was reversed. In the year 2000, Faustina was raised to the altar as a canonized saint, proving to us what Jesus told her was true when she was distressed that the convent did not have a saint in the community. Do not cry. You are that saint.